All right, welcome everybody. Justice is a process here, and we are doing a special look inside the Karmelo Anthony trial. Now, I have been silent on this case. Maybe you've noticed, maybe you haven't, but I haven't actually been. I've been working on it in the background. I was watching it. I was taking it in. Of course, there's other cases that we had courtroom access to, and I was focusing on those while I was working on this project that I'm doing with this, because that courtroom was shut down by the judge, as everyone knows, and media was not allowed to record what was going on inside. No audio, no video. They limited the amount of press that was coming in there, so it's been a very closed proceeding, which I, of course, am opposed to always. And I've been watching though, everything I could watch on it, everything I could read on it. And the way I followed it is I created a Notebook LM Justice AI powered notebook to capture all the coverage and then be able to synthesize it and watch it and try to understand. And then I thought to myself, you know what? This helped me see this trial and be able to come to a conclusion about the trial. I'm not going to discuss what my conclusion is right now. And I said, why not walk through that with my audience? It's not going to be long 8-hour trial days. This is going to be much shorter. But what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a video that summarizes the day, and then a presentation that goes a little bit deeper into the day, and I'll walk you through it, talk you through it. And then I am going to do something I normally don't do with these notebooks because they're normally members only. Now, while this presentation is airing, because it's going to be a multi-part presentation, I'm thinking about 6 or 7 parts. Maybe could fall 1 or 2 less than that. There was 5 days of trial, so I don't know if I'll do 2 after trial pieces. So that's why I say 6 or 7 parts. But we're going to take on each day of trial separately to let you digest it, let you watch it, let you go inside it. And then for my members, while we're live releasing these, members will get access immediately. However, once I'm done and once this is aired, everyone else will get access to. It'll become a living place that people could come to, chat with, try to gain a better understanding. I'll continue to try to update it and make sure that the latest articles are in it. I can keep up to 500 live sources in it at a time. And I've got hundreds of sources in there right now that's going to be driving this research and driving what I'm going to bring to you. So, without further ado, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the background of the case. You may not unless you're living under a rock, right? You should know something about this case. It's been all over the news, been all over the media. This is a situation where a young man was at a track meet. He had a weapon with him. He went into a tent that he wasn't supposed to be in, or at least he was legally allowed to be in this tent, but track protocols and decorum, and from talking to my son, this is apparently a big no-no, because my son was a track star, and you're not supposed to do what this guy was doing. But on the other hand, it's not necessarily something that requires physical confrontation, right? But there's a confrontation, and out of that confrontation, 1 stab wound is administered by the one athlete on another. There's a size disparity by about 30 pounds, okay? 30 to 50 pounds. It might be 60 pounds. We'll get into it. We'll see it. I can't remember off the top of my head. But there's a pretty big size disparity between these 2 gentlemen, between these 2 students. Net result is the one student dies from this single stab wound with a pocket knife. And the other student ends up charged with red rum. And then to add to it, there's a racial aspect to it, because the one student is white and the other student is black. And that became the story nationally and in the media as this case worked its way to trial. And then the judge, inexplicably, in a case that is wrought with racial tension, wrought with all sorts of interest and agendas, decides to close the courtroom and kick everybody out and let only a few selected media folks in to tell us what's going on. And that was a catastrophic decision. And then, and I'm going to call this correctly, the jury ended up having no black people on it at all. Now, there's been many out there who said, oh, it was only white people. That is not correct. There were other races. There was, I think, an Indian, a couple of Asian Americans on there. And, you know, coming off the Chow trial, I don't think that makes anybody feel great in the black community that you have the Asian Americans in there. But regardless, there were no black people on the jury, and apparently there were 3 black jurors that were available to be put on the jury, and they were thrown off under what's called a Batson challenge. And essentially, the defense raised a Batson challenge, saying that basically that they believe that that there was no good cause, forced the state to come on and actually say, hey, why are we getting rid of why were you getting rid of these people? And they said that because they were educators. Allegedly, due to the fact that they were educators, they were unable, the state didn't feel. Now, again, we were not in the courtroom. This is all coming off of reports and media reports. We don't know what the questions that were asked were. We don't know what this was. The judge failed his duties, and he believes he did the right thing. I believe he did it. It was catastrophic because he limited the media in a case that needed the media there, that needed eyes on it. If there was ever a case worth watching, it was this case, because it's a case that has divided the country along the lines of race, and we needed to see it with our own eyes so we could see and decide for ourselves what happened. Because as my dad always said, there's 2 sides to every story, and the truth is in the middle. And in this case, I think there's nothing truer than that statement right there. And it's difficult to assess. So the point of this exercise that we're about to do, I'm not telling you this is an official transcript, because it's not. I'm not telling you that this is going to do justice to watching the case or what justice would have been like watching the case, because it won't. But what it will do is, I hope, make you a little bit more informed, because I'm choosing right now to, on the outset, at the very beginning of this, I'm not telling you where I fall. I'm not telling you whether I agree with the verdict or disagree with the verdict, or I think the jury got it right or got it wrong. Okay? And self-defense cases are ones I love to watch. They were my dad's forte, and I have a lot of experience in watching, analyzing, talking about these things, knowing what needs to happen. We're going to get in. There's a lot to understand. There's a lot to understand about what was done and what wasn't done in this case. And there are some things that are very concerning that we will walk through as we go through this exercise. But we will begin the case where every case begins. Day 1, opening statements. And with that long introduction, let's jump in. The way we're going to do this, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to watch a presentation put together by Notebook LM using all the sources I compiled for day 1. And this is how I watched the trial. I would go out and just so you understand the methodology of this, and I can do this, you can check the sources. So what I did is, I was watching this trial, I'm going out and finding all available news media on this particular date regarding this trial and regarding this particular day of trial. And then it brings it all in. And then it creates a report for me to read. And for those of you that want to read the more detailed report, it will be in the notebook, okay? And it's very detailed, and it's unbiased. It was very important to me to be unbiased, okay? Just deliver what happened in the courtroom. Don't tell me your thoughts on it. But it goes in and delivers this, and then puts it together into a video that tells you, it's 4 to 6 minute video that summarizes the day. And then I was able to put it into a presentation. And then we have, other materials as well that are in the Notebook LM folder. But those are the 2 things we're going to be paying attention to. This should not, each day coverage here, I can't guarantee you how long it'll be, because I talk a lot. But I'm going to talk you through it. But I'm going to stay silent when we watch this video to introduce you everything that happened in day 1. Maybe you've known about this, maybe you haven't. Maybe there's some things you didn't see or didn't hear, and we're going to dispel everything, because I tell you there's so much misinformation out there, and we're going to we're going to get through it all. We're going to cut through it all. So, anyways, with that background, let's get into day 1 of the trial, and here we go.
It's June 4th, 2026. Outside the Collin County Courthouse in McKinney, Texas, the temperature is pushing 90 degrees, and hundreds of protesters are actively clashing in the parking lot. Getting inside the building requires navigating a severe security bottleneck. The facility is locked down by 24 armed guards, and Judge John Roach Jr. has enforced a strict, absolute ban on all cameras, recording devices, and cell phones. That intense restriction creates a deeply claustrophobic environment inside the 296th District Court. Out of the hundreds of people sweating on the steps outside, only 27 secured a seat in the public gallery. Across the center aisle, the families of the 17-year-old victim, Austin Metcalf, and the 19-year-old defendant, Karmelo Anthony, sit in total silence, separated by a few feet of physical space and a heavy emotional divide. By completely blacking out the electronic noise, the judge forced the jury, and everyone else in the room, to focus entirely on the raw physical evidence and sworn testimony presented from the stand. At 9:21 a.m., First Assistant District Attorney Bill Werski delivered the state's opening argument. He categorized the fatal stabbing under the track team tent as a provoked and fully unjustified murder. Werski argued that Anthony launched a sneak attack using a concealed knife. He told the jury directly that the killing had absolutely nothing to do with race, and it certainly wasn't an act of self-defense. By 10 a.m., defense attorney Mike Howard presented his counter-narrative. He referred to his client by his nickname, Mello, describing him not as a killer, but as an A student who held down 2 jobs while maintaining a 3.7 grade point average. Howard leaned into the physical environment of the track meet. He explained that heavy, dark rain had rolled into the stadium, prompting Anthony to seek shelter in a public tent, a space from which Metcalf had no legal authority to physically eject him. The 12 jurors are immediately presented with 2 conflicting versions of reality, both allegedly occurring in the exact same few square feet of space. To prove their version of events, the prosecution called their first witness at 10:05 a.m., Tarrant County forensic video analyst Mark Porter. Court staff rolled a massive television screen in front of the jury box. Porter walked them through grainy surveillance footage captured from the stadium's press box. It clearly shows Anthony running away from the track tent seconds after the stabbing, while other students point him out to nearby coaches. The state then played video of Anthony's arrest about 15 minutes later. He is seen wearing a gray sweatshirt and dark pants, complying completely with the officers as they place him in handcuffs. But during cross-examination, the defense exposed a critical gap in the state's most objective evidence. The cameras easily recorded the moments leading up to the confrontation and the immediate aftermath. The interior of the team tent itself, however, was entirely obscured. It was a complete visual blind spot. There is no footage showing who threw the first punch, who pushed who, or how the physical violence actually began. As the court dismissed for a lunch break at 11:45 a.m., that lack of definitive proof hung over the room. Outside the building, the tension and frustration mirrored the trial, with crowds growing increasingly rowdy under the midday sun. Without a clear video recording of the stabbing, the prosecution couldn't rely on technology to secure a conviction. They would have to build their case on the highly subjective, varying memories of the teenagers who were standing inside the tent. When the trial resumed at 1:45 p.m., the defense leaned heavily on their advantage. The prosecution's own expert admitted he couldn't visually prove how the violence started. The state immediately pivoted. They moved away from the cold technical analysis of pixels and frames and called the surviving coaches and a school athletic trainer to the stand to provide first-hand accounts. The prosecution then played the frantic 911 call from the track meet. The audio filled the courtroom, capturing the chaos of a coach desperately administering CPR to the fading 17-year-old. The clinical atmosphere of the trial vanished. Heavy, visible reactions rippled through the public gallery and the jury box as the visceral reality of a young athlete dying played out over the speakers. Before wrapping up the day's testimony, the state presented one final piece of physical evidence: the actual athletic jacket a coach had used to apply pressure to Austin Metcalf's stab wounds, its fabric deeply stained with blood. As Judge Roach adjourned the first day of testimony, the jury was left to weigh a blurry, incomplete technological record against the stark physical evidence of a lost life. The state proved a tragedy occurred. Now they have to prove it was murder.
All right, so that is the introduction to the day. Now we're going to go a little deeper into this because I have, as I mentioned earlier, we have a slideshow that we're going to go through, and that will go into greater detail of what we heard. But right off the bat, what do we hear, right? We hear that we have two different versions of events. We have one version of the event that says this individual enters a tent, seems to be wanting to cause trouble, sits down sits down inside the tent, and immediately begins trying to incite people around him, and baits someone to come over and attack him. And that is the whole basis. Understand this. That is the basis that the state is using to say this was an intentional crime. Okay, make no mistake about that. They're saying that he came into that tent with intent on using that knife and then started baiting people to come attack him. That is their theory. And I have a large problem with that. Because, and again, prosecutors love that stuff. Prosecutors love to tell a story like that. But that is not what happened in this case. And they'll get deeper into it. But the defense tells the story, another story, and says, oh, guess what? There was a reason why he should be in the tent. And that reason was because there was a rainstorm. And as a result, he had a lawful reason to be in the tent. Not because he wants to come in and stab somebody or incite somebody or provoke somebody. No. There's a rainstorm. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go too deep into analysis because I'll end up overlapping. But we're going to walk through what we just watched in the form of a slideshow, and I'm going to give you feedback, and this will go a little deeper. So, court began 9 a.m., or this was published because I did this, like I said, each day of the trial. But this is a procedural reconstruction of what occurred daily in this case. So let's go, we open up with the exact number of public gallery seats available. There were 27 seats. There were hundreds of citizens that there were hundreds of citizens that were turned away. Okay? Hundreds of citizens. And so there were hundreds of citizens turned away who wanted to come in. And again, this is the number one biggest issue with this case that many people focused in on the first day, and that was that the judge had limited access to the courtroom. And that's a major concern. I mean, that is a concern. That's a huge concern, especially, as I mentioned, in a case like this that has all of the people. Now, what you can't see, I'll read under. It says, before the doors opened, the Anthony family formed a prayer circle on the concrete. Surrounding them, a polarized crowd of demonstrators and activists vied for entry. So there were protests. There were, and you can see that right there. There were protesters. I mean, it was a crazy scene outside there. You could see it on the news, as you're watching this. Now, this is a layout of the way the courthouse was. And I'll find a place for myself here. Let's just put me up here. Actually, better yet. Give me a moment here. So there we go. Sorry, guys. All right, so there you can see the layout of the courtroom. And you had on the left side of the courtroom, you had the Anthony family. On the right side, you had the Metcalf family. You had prosecution, defense, witness stand there. The jury is sitting on the left side near the Anthony family was actually near the jury box, while the right side of the gallery was actually technically behind the defense table. Karmelo Anthony is sitting there. He's taking notes. He's stoic. There were no cell phones, electronics, cameras. They were all banned from the courtroom. And again, very controversial for the judge doing that, because it limited the ability for information to travel outside the courtroom in a fast way. Now, most importantly, here's the most important stuff to understand about this case, because this is it right here. Okay, the the battleground in this case rests on two things: provocation or justified self-defense. So, in order to secure the conviction in this case, the state does not have to prove Anthony brought the knife to kill. So, they did not technically have to do that. They only needed to prove that he intentionally provoked the confrontation that led to the stabbing. Okay? That's what I was talking about earlier. They're saying that he went into the tent and essentially provoked someone to come to him so he could use the knife. That is what they're saying. And what they're going, and again, the motive or proving that anything beyond that isn't needed, because the reason why the case is so simplified coming down to that issue is because Texas law only allows deadly force in self-defense unless the encounter is provoked. Now, if those of you who followed me for the Chow case, you will know that was a big issue in the Chow case. In fact, that was everything that the state was resting their case on, which was that Mr. Chow provoked the incident. In that case, his son provoked the incident, but he wasn't armed, and he chased after him without a weapon, and then Mr. Chow came along behind his son. And that was the whole issue, was at what point was there any provocation on Mr. Chow's part, and should he be grouped in with what happened inside the store, since he was in a back room and he only comes out after his son begins pursuit. In this case, totally different, because there's just Karmelo Anthony. Karmelo Anthony enters the tent, sits down, and according to the state, he's an uninvited individual in a place that decorum says he shouldn't be. Students begin to try to resolve that situation. He starts making comments back, and then the question becomes this. And this is where, in my opinion, this is the danger of just how the media portrays things, how a prosecutor who's out of step with understanding youthfulness, and they're taking things at face value. Because the whole basis for this alleged provocation is that Anthony is being confronted in front of his friends. Now, this is where the defense failed, and I'm going to get into it right now. Because having raised 4 boys, 2 of which have gone through, or one's in his middle of his high school experience, another one just got done it. Having been through that on my own, things are said in the middle of a group. And this is why it was extremely important that you get a psychologist or someone or an expert who can explain where the teen mind is. First of all, they're not thinking like you and I. So if you get a jury that's made up of older individuals who are trying to process what's going on between teenagers in high school, you're going to miss the ball game entirely on how it's being processed. And the important part about this case is this. This case is only about Karmelo Anthony's brain and his mind, and what happened in his mind. How did he perceive the events? And that is the part that everybody seems to miss. Because this is not about how I, as a 44-year-old man, perceive it. It's not how a 50-year-old man perceives it, or a 50-year-old female, or a 40-year-old female perceives it, or how an adult with lots of life experience in a completely developed brain experiences it. This is how a 17-year-old at a track meet, being confronted by multiple individuals and being caught out in front of everyone, responds. And they don't respond intelligently. But the question is, was he really trying to provoke something, or was he a scared teenager being confronted by bigger kids and trying to warn them off? And that's where his defense failed to try to get that across to the jury. And they failed in several ways. They failed by never allowing the individual whose mind is on trial to testify. And they didn't bring in experts to talk about what the youthful mind says. How does a 17-year-old process this? Is he provoking someone, or is he trying to scare them off in an entirely stupid way? And then the other question that needed to be answered from Karmelo Anthony himself is, why was the knife in your book bag in the first place? Was there a lawful reason? I understand it was lawful and they go about it. The defense did it entirely stupid. Oh, well, it's okay and it's legal. It's technically legal to be in a stadium. And that they did that for a multitude of reasons, because there's another reason it comes up. Because that is another way that self-defense can get nullified, is if you're in commission of a felony. And the state said he was in commission of a felony because he was possessing it on school grounds. The defense said no. Technically, legally, no, he was not committing a felony because you're allowed to possess them at that particular arena, and that's not considered in school. So therefore, the possession of that knife in that arena is not committing a felony. It was a jury answer to decide whether they were going to exclude self-defense or not. But that was brought in. But what they didn't do was say, why did he have it? Did he have a lawful reason for having it there? And that answer never came in. I'm not going to add it. But it should have been explained. I'm not going to make up a reason. I've heard reasons why that makes sense to me. I've talked about that with my son, who was a track superstar, said yes, entirely. And that reason I've heard is that you're cleaning your cleats, okay? And that's why he would have had it. He was a football player, and he's a track person. You're out there, you're walking around, you want to get the dirt out of your cleats, so you would have that folding knife. Also, many kids have folding knives, okay? It's just there. It doesn't mean that they're walking around plotting a killing. And nobody in their right mind is going to think, gee, I'm going to go out and kill someone with a 5-inch folding knife. It obviously can happen, but the defense didn't address that. The defense just said, we're not going to address it. We don't have to prove it. And that's where they're mistaken. In a self-defense case, there is a burden on the defense. There's not a burden to prove it entirely. They have to raise it, but they have to raise it strong enough, and they have to put the individual on the stand to present the strongest evidence and the strongest account. And then it is the state's job to disprove what they heard on that witness stand beyond a reasonable doubt. And when you don't testify and you don't show up, like Karmelo Anthony did, big mistake. But anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm sorry. Because that bothers me greatly. That bothers me greatly. Now, what does that mean? That means that the jury's verdict, that does not mean the jury's verdict was wrong given what they were presented. But what it means is that the wrong defense went in. And the defense attorney owns that. Now, an appellate court's got to decide, does that rise to the level of ineffective assistance to counsel? And the question becomes, if an attorney is telling you not to testify and you are 17 years old, you're going to rely on that attorney. And, there's a lot of questions that got to get answered there. And then his parents have all said, we followed our attorney, we followed what we were told. No, you were supposed to do what you should think was right. And what you should have done was had your son testify and stand up there. Because look, when you have a case where you have every other student who was present comes in and testifies and tells their version, and those versions aren't helpful to you, and you're the only one that was there, you're the closest in proximity, you're the one who made the decision to use deadly force, and you're not willing to come up and say, hey, I did it and I do it again, but I'm sad he died. Because that's what you got to be willing to say in a self-defense case. Because you had a real fear of great bodily harm or death or potential death, and you used that knife, and you were fearful. I guarantee you there's no way this kid's convicted of red rum. This kid's at most manslaughter if he gets on a witness stand. And in fact, he might have even been convicted of the lesser one. I think he would have been convicted of something, but he would have been convicted of potentially the lesser charge that would have only gotten him 6 months to 2 years. And we'll talk about that as we get later on down the road when we get to jury charges. But my God, this was such a debacle, in my opinion, from the defense perspective. But that's it. So, getting into this, the defense or the state comes in and frames the incident as a calculated, uninvited trespass and sneak attack, right? Like, this is crazy to me. That's what they say this is. That this young kid, he's at a track meet. He's a 3.7 student, GPA student. And he's coming to a track meet to go kill somebody. Come on, man. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry, I don't buy that at all. This case has nothing to do, I agree with that part. And this is a quote from it. It has nothing to do with race. This has nothing to do with self-defense. This is unprovoked, unjustified red rum. I disagree with that prosecutor. And this is where I have a problem, because the prosecutor is a problem here too. Because the prosecutor should have looked at this case and charged this case appropriately, in my opinion, and they didn't. The idea that you're going to say, and I understand they did what prosecutors do, because prosecutors, a good prosecutor against a bumbling defense attorney can win a case, and they get they get a lot of advantages, even though there's a presumption of innocence that's present. But if you don't have an attorney who's willing to fight, who's not doing everything they need to do, this is what happens. Somebody died, a young kid died, and they are giving the justification for these people, for this jury, to go ahead and convict. And there's several things that come into effect, and we'll get into it as it comes up in this. I'm not going to just jump ahead. But this alone, I don't believe it's a complete walk here, because there was a definite lapse in judgment. But to sit here and tell me that this was an unprovoked, unjustified red rum, I think is an unfair assessment of exactly what occurred. But let's go on. The defense, right? So the defense stands up. And what does the defense do in their opening? They portray a terrified straight-A student trapped in a chaotic crossfire. Attorney Mike Howard, he pushes back against the noise surrounding the case. He introduces the jury to Mello, an epileptic 3.7 GPA honor student working 2 jobs who only sat under the rival tent to seek shelter from the rain. Anthony reacted in a split second of fear and chaos as the group of larger teenagers was turning on him. And that is, look, listen. As someone who's covered lots of cases, hundreds of cases at this point, I've watched hundreds of cases in my lifetime. Before I ever had a channel, after I had a channel, when I was around my dad, right? One thing that I have found out is that the way a teenager's mind processes things is completely different. And in Bill Worski's world is not the way it happens. Now, that's the vengeance world. That's the world everybody wants, right? Throw them away, lock them up, punish them hard. Don't try to understand it at all. But you know what? This will not be the last time something like this happens. And it is because we as adults walk blindly through this to fail to understand what is going on with our teenagers and what's happening. And then we can't prevent these things because we don't look at it correctly. We don't understand it. We just go and punish it. And we go, okay, we punished it. Look, this is going to happen again. It's going to happen again. It's the kids getting together and throwing rocks. Remember that case happening. Stupid decisions all the time are happening because these kids don't think like you and I, because their brain isn't developed, because there's so many factors going on that are in their life that we need to start understanding as adults and people raising these children, and we can help to make sure that these type of catastrophic situations don't occur. But I absolutely believe in a split second of fear and chaos, he reaches into that bag and he's got a group of angry people bigger than him, who are embarrassing him, who are calling him out in front of his friends, and that's provocation, yeah, from the other side. And in his mind, in that moment, it's life or death. It may not be to you and I, but for him it is. It's life or death of who he is, who he's seen, and we all go, well, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, but that's the undeveloped teenage mind in that world that they live in high school. That is just rife with stupidity and rife with dumbness, okay? And that is where this was born out of. And then we have to decide what we do with it, because there's another side, and the Metcalfs are not innocent in this, because they confronted someone who warned them that he had a knife. And they went for it anyways, because they thought they were tough. So they don't get. It shouldn't be a situation where we just forget the other side. But it's easy to do that in situations like this. And that does not mean that just because Metcalf advanced and was stupid, that it just gets completely forgotten. There is a middle that could have been landed on, that could have made everyone happy and satisfied, and we could have dealt with this, and we could have done something to move this forward in a better way than is being made here, so that the memory of Austin Metcalf is not one of racial divide, but it's one of better understanding how youth come together and how youth interact, and how we can better help our children come together and not make these catastrophic decisions, and certainly not think that physicality is the way to solve this. It's not. You know, many times I've had to sit down and talk with my teenage sons and say, that's not how the real world works. You know, you don't just punch somebody in the face. It doesn't matter that you can punch him in the face and that you might be stronger than them. You might have a better weapon than them. That doesn't matter. There's consequences, and you never win that. Nobody wins that. But tell them that at that age, they can't. So understanding how it processes, it funnels through his brain. And that is how this jury, that is what the defense should have stood up and said and shown Karmelo's brain and said, this, we are here because this, each of you, not your brain, not your brain, not your brain, not your brain, not your, Karmelo's brain. We are here to see this incident through his brain. We are here to look at what he saw, what he heard, how he processed it, and we're going to help you understand that. We are not here to excuse. We are here to understand. And that's what needed to be done in this case. And that is not what happened. Nobody took the time to understand. So we've walked away from this with immense tragedy on all sides. Families broken up. People, you know, angry. It ends up dividing everyone instead of bringing everyone together and something that we should all bring together and agree. This was a tragedy that should never have happened. And yes, responsibility needs to be taken, but the correct amount of responsibility needs to be taken, and the correct outcomes need to be taken. Anyways, let's move on. I apologize. I told you I talk a lot, and that's what you're going to get. Now, here's the reality, and let me take myself out of the picture for a moment. So here's the reality. There's two incompatible realities of the same 15-minute window. This is what's on trial right now. Like, this is what comes out after closing arguments. The state's reality. The catalyst is a deliberate trespass to provoke. And that's where I have to, again, that's what I think it's crazy. Anybody who believes that he entered that tent with that intent, I mean, you're just not understanding. You're clearly not understanding. You're wanting to see the worst in this situation. The defendant's an armed aggressor. He does a calculated sneak attack. I mean, are you kidding me? And it's unjustified malice, the core motive. Now, the defense says he enters the tent seeking shelter from the rain. He's an epileptic honor student. He has a split-second reaction to fear by a group of kids that are getting angrier and angrier and calling him out and putting him on the spot and putting his manhood on the spot. And it's self-preservation against larger teens. But it's also bigger self-preservation than that. Everybody's got to understand that. This is a moment where you've got these teens, these bigger guys are calling him out. He's captain of the football team. They're calling him out. Instead of just being like, hey man, what are you doing in here? Talk to him like a human being. They're telling him, get the hell out of here. And he's saying, make me. And this is not provocation. He's saving face. And then you know what? Like I've had to tell my sons, dude, when you do that, what are you going to do when they actually walk up on you? Are you going to use it? Are you going to have to? What are you going to do? Because you've just told everyone you're trying to save face. Get up and walk away, Karmelo. Back down, dude. And I guarantee you, he would probably back down and walk out of that tent now. But at that moment, in that time, he wasn't able to do that. And only an individual who understands the adolescent teen mind can help that jury see it through Karmelo's eyes. And that's what's important in this case, seeing it through Karmelo's eyes. Can he formulate the mens rea needed to get to the crime of red rum? The answer to that question, in my opinion, is no. So where does it go? Because the way he's seeing this, it's an attack on him. It's escalating. He's not provoking this. He's trying to resolve it in a stupid way that teens try to resolve things. But he's not. What he's trying to do is de-escalate. And see, everybody looks at it and goes, no, he's not. He was saying this. And that jury of old people, I don't know what their ages were, but that jury, that prosecutor, that old 20-year veteran prosecutor, 20-year veteran judge, they don't understand this. They're looking at it like it's the normal people. That's not that. You got to understand how teens operate. But you know what? It was the defense's job to be the reasonable ones to come in. So anyways, so the trial day starts out with, and let me get myself out of here again, with digital eyewitness. The first thing they do now, I want to make sure this is clarified here because I've seen several social media suggestions that there was a video that was unreleased, that it wasn't played, that it somehow, if played, it would have shown that Karmelo was innocent. That's untrue. That video was played. It has not been, I attempted to get a hold of it. It is not and has not been made available to the general public and will not until the appeals are over. And they made that decision because they don't, but the general public can view it. They're just not going to release it so it can go on social media. But if you want to go down to the courthouse and put a request in, you can go down to the courthouse and get a private viewing of that video. Anybody can do it. It's not being hidden, and it doesn't show the actual moments. It shows, because it's too far away, it shows moments, but it can't show the actual moments. And this is a witness that talks about that. He's a forensic video analyst for Tarrant County, for the Tarrant County DA. He's called as the first witness. They roll in a giant TV screen, and 5 distinct camera angles capturing the east and west sides of Cookendale Stadium are provided for the jury. All right? The state's video analysis proves the following. 15 minutes is shown. They show Austin Metcalf entering Cookendale Stadium. The grainy footage shows a push and shove inside the tent, followed immediately by Anthony exiting and running along the stadium, but it's too grainy to actually see the stabbing itself. And Anthony stops, puts his hands in the air, and is handcuffed by 2 uniformed officers. Okay? And if you follow what's being seen on here, again, this is why this is not a scenario where, in my opinion, and this is why one of the things that I think should have been emphasized, and it probably was, I don't think it's the most important thing to be emphasized, but when you're thinking about someone who has entered in and says, I'm provoking them, right? Because I want to stab them, I want to kill them. I'm not just trying to get away. They start stabbing, dude, they're going to stab them and stab them and stab. Like, they're there to inflict damage. Not in this case. One stab wound, awkward angle, boom, up. And he flees. And he flees. And he doesn't even grab his book bag. He leaves. He leaves the knife behind. And he gets the heck out of there. Because he's a scared kid. Because in that moment, he felt scared. He felt like, and again, there's a place that this can land. Because there's a question, in my opinion, this should have been a question between manslaughter and the lesser below manslaughter, which I can't remember off the top of my head. We'll be covering it in day 5. But there's another charge out there that would have been 6 months to 2 years. And that basically says that he didn't believe he would kill the kid, stabbing him with a 3.5-inch knife. And you know what? That might be reasonable. But guess what? There's one person who would have had to have been testifying, who would have had to tell the jury what he believed or didn't believe, what he thought, what he felt, what he saw. And that is Karmelo Anthony. And that is the biggest injustice in this entire case, as far as how it was handled, in the fact that he didn't testify. That's ridiculous. And you know what? There's no amount of statements or things that were said, because they could have all, but I do believe it. I think his defense attorneys are as unenlightened as the prosecutor and the judge and everyone else, because they really looked at the statements and said, oh, they're really bad. No, they're not. It's the way teens interact. There's a way you can support that. You put them in the record, you have them testify to it, and you have an expert come in and discuss how teens interact and things that teens are said. And you just put that forward, and the jury does with it what it wants. They can adopt it or they cannot. And the state can go after it and ask all the questions they want. But you have to handle it. Because the state put everything in there. You've got to explain it. And yeah, you know what? Let him get brutalized by the DA. Let him show what type of, let them see him in a confrontation. Let him cry in front of the jury. Let him show real remorse and compassion for the victim. And prepare him. He was not in jail. They could have prepared him. They've had a year to prepare him. Why? How does that not happen? Anyways, again, we're jumping ahead. So, the camera captures the provocation and the flight, but the fatal plunge remains hidden Prosecutors painstakingly walked the jury through the video, second by second. Porter acknowledged a critical gap in the digital record. While the footage clearly shows one person shove another and a reciprocal pushback, the actual physical stabbing is obscured from the camera's line of sight. So essentially, they can see them all interacting, see them talking. They see 4 people come up to him. They see a shove, a pushback, which is probably the stabbing, and then they see Karmelo Anthony flee. But the knife itself going in, they can't see that. So that becomes a point that is a actual point of contention that the state is going to have to introduce evidence on as to what actually happened and occurred. And we'll get to the next pieces of that. That comes over the next few days of trial. Because they had the video of it, it would have been a lot easier. So after they get done with the video guy, the next person they call to the stand is head track coach Rob Starr, and he establishes the unwritten rules of stadium territory. So to prove Anthony was trespassing, which is ridiculous, he wasn't trespassing in the stadium. He had a lawful right to be there. Just because there's some unwritten rule, again, this is the craziness of the whole thing. There was a perception of trespassing, but he wasn't trespassing. Okay, in the sense that he wasn't illegally. There was not a legal issue with where he was at. But the state calls Memorial coach Rob Starr. He testifies to the strict unwritten convention of track meets that it's highly unusual and inappropriate for a rival athlete to sit inside another school's designated team tent. Starr also testifies to the Frisco ISD Code of Conduct, emphasizing that weapons are not allowed in any shape, form, or fashion. So, that again, that's important. That's how the state established the element that says he was trespassing, that he shouldn't have been where he was at. Again, the jury gets to decide whether or not they agree, whether or not that should be considered to be actual trespassing or not. The next witness that comes on is the clinical video evidence gives way to the chaotic human terror of the aftermath. So then they call Liberty High School defensive coordinator Joshua Redman, and he takes the stand, and the state plays the 911 audio. Okay, and this is where the state gets their emotional parts in, and it's Coach Robert Thayer describing the unfolding panic. There's teenagers shouting. Coach Redman is encouraging Metcalf to hold on. It's a very emotional moment for the jury. It's a very emotional moment for everyone involved. Again, we don't know how Anthony handled it. We hope he was showing emotion. We know that the Metcalf family, it had to have been unbelievably hard to hear that. Does it prove anything? No. Besides just setting the scene. But I can't imagine. I can't imagine being a parent in the room having to listen to that to your kid. But it shows you the chaoticness, the way this scene was unfolding, the terror, the fear. Terrible situation. But that's the next witness that comes on. And then they introduce the final thing that happens the final evidence of the day comes in, and it's the introduction of the bloodstained jacket that Coach Redman was wearing. It's a heavy silence in the courtroom. The state physically produces the jacket Coach Redman was wearing that day. Redman testified that amid the panic and scatter under the tent, he stripped off his own jacket and pressed it firmly against Metcalf's chest in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. Now, listen, I am not saying this to be insensitive. I don't know, because again, this case has been heavily restricted from allowing us to see what was going on in this case. But listen, if there was ever a potentially, what I would like to understand, what was the evidentiary value of that jacket coming in? Because all that was meant to do was inflame the jury, in my opinion. Okay? And you may disagree with me now. You may say, Justice, but to me, I can't imagine a more prejudicial moment than showing this bloody jacket and go, okay, well, what does the bloody jacket show us? This was pressed against him. This is not where we need blood spatter. This is not where it tells us direction of stab wounds. This tells us nothing. It's nothing more than to anger the jury. And that tells you about this judge. So those of you out there, oh, this judge is great. Oh, yeah, no, this judge, that to me is a telling point. When that judge lets that jacket in, what was the evidentiary value of that jacket? What did it show? Besides, let's anger the jury. Let's show the jury the devastation, which is, I mean, the jury feels it, right? This kid lost his life. But to go show that, what does that add to Karmelo's mind? If it was Karmelo's jacket that he wore, and there's stab wounds or blood spatter or whatever that could show. This is a jacket that's used as part of CPR? Why does that need to come in? The fact the judge allowed it, I'm sure, I would like to think the defense would have asked not to. I'm sure the judge, like he did in many other rulings, ruled against the defense. But I don't know that for a fact. I just wanted to point that out because to me, that tells me everything. Now, the defense with this witness turns it on, right? I remember at the end of day one, there were some positive reports coming out regarding what the defense did with the witnesses on day one. Toby Shook, who was the second chair in the case, he concedes that, and this is extremely important, and this is underreported, but this is extremely important to everyone to understand, again, to get inside Karmelo's mind, because that's what we need to do. That's what you need to do. That's what this jury needed to do. Redmond conceded he did not know that Centennial High School lacked a team tent that day. When asked where a student warming up in the rain might logically seek shelter if they had no team tent, Redmond admitted he didn't know. And the defense immediately noted to the jury, it makes sense, though, now why Karmelo would have been in there. And when you understand the order of events that's going to come out over days 2, 3, and 4, and 5 of this trial, you're going to understand and you're going to see the real reality of what was really going on here. That Karmelo Anthony did not enter that tent intent on causing harm or provoking anyone. He was provoked because he was confronted for coming into a tent that he thought he had a right to be in because his friend invited him in because it was raining and he was socializing. And then the social code of the teenagers got broken. And what do I mean by that? He gets called out. And then all sorts of stupidity happens. But the question is, was that stupidity that he was spewing when he was saying those words, was he saying those to actually provoke a physical confrontation, or was he saying it to actually, in his mind, de-escalate this? To say, but de-escalate it where he was going to be the man. Because in his mind, that's all that's important. How he looks to everyone else around him. He's not thinking about what's going to happen. He's not thinking about what if he actually comes over to me. He's just saying it to diffuse it. Because that's what happened here. And that's what the defense needed to get this jury to understand. And that's what this trial should have been about. The mind of Karmelo Anthony. Go inside the mind. Everything funnels through the mind of Karmelo Anthony. Not our minds. Through his mind. Through the mind of a 17-year-old who's dealing with this moment. Through the mind of Austin Metcalf. Understanding what was going on, what he's doing, what he's likely doing here. Why is he being threatening? Why is he coming up and putting hands on somebody? Right? And what does all that mean when you're in this environment? Who's provoking who? Can you say beyond a reasonable doubt, once you understand how it all works, can you really say beyond a reasonable doubt that Karmelo Anthony was the provocateur in this case? When he doesn't go over to him, he stays seated. Metcalf comes to him. Then you have a distinction of what he does and what happens and what's happening in the mind. And we'll get into that as we get into the medical examiner, all that other testimony as we walk through days 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you may not agree with me. There's people out there who have strong opinions about this. They don't care because they don't want to be reasonable about it. They don't want to look at it through the lens, through reality's lens. They want to see vengeance. They want to see their version of events. And I'm not telling you Karmelo's version of events where he is where he should be completely just giving a pass on this. No, but it's not, and it's got nothing to do with race. This has not. There's one thing that this has nothing to do with. Race is not a factor in this at all. There was no racial component in that 10. I agree with that 110%. These boys didn't have race in their eyes. This was teenage stupidness. This was teenage one-upness that landed in. And the question we have to ask as society is, how do we deal with that? Because there's failures all over the place. There's failures on all sides. There's failures on how both boys were conducting themselves that day. That falls on the parents. And that also falls on us as a society in helping parents understand their children better and understanding the minds of 17-year-olds so that when they're out and about, so that when they're at events like this, they don't end up in this situation. So day one synthesis. The objective reality is established. The state successfully proves the physical reality of the tragedy. The video captured the rapid escalation. It's shown to the jury. The coach's testimony proves the fatal result, and they do it in a way that absolutely would have invoked, I'm sure, many, many feelings inside those jurors. But because the video misses the exact moment of that plunge, the mechanical footage alone cannot answer the trial's core question. Was Karmelo Anthony a calculating provocateur or a terrified teenager? The unblinking video, the emotional aftermath, human toll, the missing intent. And see, I think this is where, in my opinion, this is where things went wrong for the defense of Karmelo Anthony. So at 6 p.m., court adjourns. Eyewitnesses are waiting the next day. Judge Roach adjourns the court for the evening. It was a Thursday evening. Court was at 9 a.m. the next day. They're going to call the teenagers that were standing with Metcalf. They were standing shoulder to shoulder with Metcalf and Anthony inside the tent. They're the ones who saw the plunge. They're the only ones that saw the plunge, and they're going to take the stand and tell. And again, remember, that is, without a shadow of a doubt, it's unimaginable that they didn't put Karmelo Anthony on the stand. I mean, you had all these students come in and tell their version, give their perspective, and you had the one kid there who could have given all the perspective in the world, whose whole trial was about his perspective, and the defense attorney doesn't put him on the stand. I mean, that guy, he canceled his YouTube account. I think he should have, because that's outrageous. And you can see exactly how they won, why he thought, this fool thought, I guess, that, they don't have the moment on the stand. And judging from what Karmelo Anthony's parents have said, they have to prove it. Oh, no, listen. The jury decides what the facts are. And they decide who's telling the truth and who's not. And they decide whether or not to trust a witness or not, or whether or not just because a witness might have a contradiction or a problem or this or that. They get to decide what it is. And when their son, Karmelo Anthony, didn't get on the witness stand, every single one in Texas is a different kind of state, man. You stand up for your rights. You stand up and you talk. Same in West Virginia. Because look, there's a lot of self-defense cases down here, and you stand up and you talk to them and you tell them why you did it. You take another person's life, you better damn well get on that witness stand and you better damn well tell them why you did it. If you're going to say it's self-defense. That is not the time to sit down and say, I'm going to invoke my right to remain silent. Well, why is that? You just took a life. You're telling us, there was no definitive statements. This was insane. The only statements that came in this trial, we haven't got to that part yet, but the only statements that come in is he's correcting the cops and says it ain't alleged, I did it. But, and I got to find this clip. I don't know what happened to it. I saw it. There was a clip. Again, I don't know if it's true or maybe it was AI, but I think it was truly. It looks, talks like, walks like. It sounded like Mike Howard, and he's saying there's two kinds of defense attorneys. There's nice guys, and there's bulldogs. And you know what? My dad told me that. You know what my dad had a code word for nice guys? And it's funny, Mike Howard saying it. Anytime my dad did not believe somebody was a fighter, or did not believe somebody was a real, I don't know if you want to call it good attorney, but an attorney that was going to win and fight for you. He would call them a nice guy. And then there was the guys that fought for you. And those are few and far between. But Mike Howard actually described himself that way. He's the guy that's friends with your judge and your prosecutor, doesn't make waves. He goes in and gets you the best plea bargain. Well, he didn't get Karmelo Anthony a plea bargain, and he sure as hell didn't get him the best deal here. He got him 35 years. And the Anthony family learned a hard lesson. When you get a guy whose whole life is built on being the nice guy, that is not the guy you want standing with your son in a room where a prosecutor's telling you that your son came to intent to provoke somebody just to stab them. You need somebody who isn't a nice guy, who's a bulldog, who wants to come in and wants to say what exactly happened, who wants to call out the state, and wants to bring the perspective in that actually matters, and says, we're putting your son's brain on trial. We're going to call the experts. If they had, I heard $600,000 to $900,000. They had plenty of money to hire experts, relocating themselves. In fact, many cases, people will say you don't bail them out if you need to spend the money on the experts, because that 12 to 15 months you spent out of jail on bail is the last 12 to 15 months you're going to have before you go away for a long time. And in Karmelo Anthony's case, never a true perspective of that, because they didn't have any experts. They sure as hell didn't have an attorney that was willing to fight properly for them. And they went in there and they got their ass kicked in a case that I don't believe should have been a 35-year case at the end of this. And you look at what I just presented for you day one, it gets worse as we go day 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it's a very winnable case for the defense as far as getting something lesser than red rum. Anyways, with that said, let me know your perspective. This is episode day 1. We will be releasing an episode every couple of days that will cover this trial. And then, like I said, I'm thinking 6 to 7 episodes. Click the link to the website. We will have a section for Karmelo Anthony. We will put together a article on each day of the trial as well. And there will be a section for you to access the notebook. And that section will, for now, when you click it, it will be members only while this thing is going on. And then eventually an announcement will be made when it is available to everyone. And everyone will be able to access it from then on. But members, you get a preview, and you get to see some of the videos and presentations that are already in store. That's the only reason why I'm delaying the release. And you get to interact and talk. So, with that said, everyone, give me your perspective. Tell me in the comments. Do you agree with what I've said? Do you disagree? You find somewhere in the middle? What are your thoughts on Karmelo Anthony's case? What are your thoughts on day 1? Was there anything in this presentation that you heard about that you didn't realize before you watched it, if you watched the whole thing? And I hope you did. Until we talk again, let justice prevail. And remember, and you, Judge Roach, remember this as well, justice always works better when we watch.
The system's rigged, man, it's time to break free. Eyes wide open, gotta see what I see. Standing on the front lines, fighting for the truth. Lift the veil of lies, it's time to be the proof. Take a stand, don't you back down. Raise your voice, let's shake the town. We're the voices that won't be ignored. Breaking chains, yeah, we're ready for war. With the power of the people, we'll make them see a world of justice, united and free. United and free. United and free. Marching with a purpose, we're taking it higher. Fighting through the struggle, igniting the fire. No more silence, we'll make the noise loud. Together in this battle, standing strong and proud. Injustice fades when courage aligns. Rise up together, break the confines. We're the voices that won't Together we'll write a new paradigm. You paradigm, you paradigm. Whoa, whoa. We're the voices that won't be ignored. Breaking chains, yeah, we're ready for war. With the power of the people, we'll make them see a world of justice, united and free. United and free. Rise up now, it's our time to shine. United and free. Together we'll write a new paradigm, new paradigm. United and free. United and free. United and free.